The soil that you see is not ordinary soil. It is the dust of the blood and the bones of our ancestors. To get to the real earth, you have to go through the upper portion. That upper portion is Crow Indian.
This is the story of a family, of the Great Spirit, of Mother Earth and her children, of how they became the dispossessed in the war against the Indians. They are the living masks of memory, and with memory comes knowledge, a memory of where the native people believe they began. Our witness, Gloria Kramer Webster.
I remember coming home from school and saying to my father that I was taking an anthropology course in which we learned that we were supposed to have come across the Bering Straits. And my father and others laughed and said, well, no, that's not true. We know where we came from. Our family came from the river, from a sea monster and a thunderbird. Doesn't have anything to do with Bering Straits. And much later, when I was back at the university teaching, there was a young Indian student who, when he heard this Bering Straits theory, got quite upset and said, well, Jesus, now they're trying to make second-class Chinamen out of us. Our first ancestors were some supernatural creature.
The West Coast Indian is especially skilled in carving, in telling stories of the past, something like Bibles carved and created in wood. Bill Reed.
Well, there's many legends of creation as there are groups of people on the coast, I suppose. But the one that I illustrated with that piece down up at the Anthropology Museum was a story of the raven and how he finds the first man. The great flood, which had covered the earth for so long, had at last receded. And even the thin strip of sand, now called Rosebit, stretching north from Naikun village, lay dry. The raven had flown there to gorge himself on the delicacies left by the receding water, so for once he wasn't hungry. But his other appetites, lust, curiosity, and the unquenchable itch to meddle and provoke things, to play tricks on the world and its creatures, these remained unsatisfied. At first he saw nothing, but as he scanned the beach again, a white flash caught his eye, and when he landed, he found at his feet, half buried in the sand, a gigantic clamshell. When he looked more closely still, he saw that the shell was full of little creatures, cowering in terror of his enormous shadow. So the raven leaned his great head close to the shell, and with a smooth trickster's tongue, he coaxed and cajoled and coerced the little creatures to come out and play in his wonderful, shiny new world. So it wasn't long before one and another of the little shell dwellers timidly emerged. Some of them immediately scurried back when they saw the immensity of the sky and the sea and the overwhelming blackness of the raven. But eventually curiosity overcame caution, and all of them crept out or scrambled out. Their descendants built on its beaches the strong, beautiful homes of the Haidas and embellished them with the powerful heraldic carvings which told of the legendary beginnings of the great families.
Blackfoot legal scholar Leroy Littlebear.
The Indians have always been here. As far as the Indians know, creation started here. You know, human beings came into existence here. They've been here from time immemorial. You will find that in some of the mythology of the Indians, just like my people, talk about creation starting with the stars, you know, the cosmos, and some of those spirits up in the sky, you know, the stars and so on, marrying. And they had, you know, in our case, they had 2 sons out of a particular marriage. One of those sons stayed here in North America, and the other son, it simply says in the story, went across the water from where the sun rises. Now, that son that went across the water was going to return. So, when the white people, when the Europeans appeared on the shores, it was that expectation, you know? And that's the reason why they were welcomed with open arms.
It is, as tides flow, a short time, 500 years since contact was made. Now that story, by the descendants of those who lived it, those who suffered it, in their own voices and at the very locales where it all began.
Actor Graham Greene.
Some legends say that our people, the red people, the four colors of people, the yellow, black, red, and white, the red people were in charge of looking after the earth. They were to be her guardian. The yellow people were in charge of the sea, the waters. The black people were in charge of the air. And the white people were given the gift of fire. And somewhere along the line, it got way out of balance.
It is an October day, a Friday, the 12th. The year is 1492. 3 ships will change the world as it is known then. 3 ships that have departed from Palos, Spain, the day before Spain expelled its entire Jewish population and ordered its Muslims to embrace Christianity. In Europe, it is a violent, intolerant time. 90 men on 3 ships led by the Admiral of the Ocean Seas called Coulon, who we know as Christopher Columbus, have sailed into a kind of paradise. From the Diary of Columbus.
The island is so green, it is a pleasure to look at, and its people are very gentle. Your Highness may believe that in all the world there can be no better or gentler people. They are quite lacking in evil and not warlike. I believe that they would become Christians very easily, for it seemed to me they had no religion. I seek gold and precious stones.
And so the goal of gold and conversion to an alien faith was set from the start. A land to be plundered, a people to be harvested. One of the few surviving Carib Indians, Garnet Joseph.
Well, frankly, I feel that Columbus, for some people is a hero, doesn't mean anything to the Carib people. Or on the 3rd of December in 1493, Columbus sighted our island, which at that time we call Waitukubuli in the Carib language. And on his first voyage, Columbus came in contact with the Carib people off the island of St. Thomas. And it wasn't friendly contact. And at that time, on that occasion, what Columbus got from our Carib people was a shower of arrows.
The day, the event, the man would be glorified. Daly saw Columbus as a hero of all time. The people Columbus had mistakenly called Indians see something very different. Playwright Thompson Highway.
Well, I mean, it's laughable that he discovered us. I mean, we weren't exactly sitting around waiting to be discovered.
Columbus was just someone who happened to get lost here on these shores.
Truth be known, we found these guys half-starved, washed up on the beach. And, oh, you poor sods, come here, you know. And cured them, and then look what happened.
When Columbus came over, he acted as if he had discovered people living on the moon, as opposed to the world, and thought we were Martians and, you know, aliens, therefore should be treated equally as alien entities.
Columbus had a hollow heart, says Cherokee artist Jimmy Durham.
He was a liar, he was a crook, he was a murderer. He was totally self-delusionary. I think he was basically a monster crazy man. And he certainly didn't discover anything under any terms.
To be discovered, someone must be lost. And the question is, who was lost and who was found? Columbus's voyages were confined to the Caribbean area. He never set foot on or saw the North American continent itself. This is the way it was. Several hundred years before Columbus, there were the talking rocks, legends and histories told by a people steeped in a faith that was inseparable from the earth they called Mother and the force they called the Great Spirit. There were then perhaps 2 million, some say as many as 15 million of them, maybe 500 or so tribes.
Today we can find our messages, our dictionaries out there on the hills that we see, the formation of the rocks, the animals that they have drawn on rocks, and all those things are leaving us messages of the past of our people, how they lived in harmony, how they were able to identify. And in there we have sacred things.
To the north, a separate people, the Inuit, we have called Eskimo. Their own saga of their voyage from the past carved in stone. Faces of a people and history and art that became the model for the moderns. And this is their dance. Rosie Oakpick is an Inuit elder.
I think this all was there in the Northwest Territories because my ancestors, when you're really looking at them, oh, they were strong, very, very strong. They survived in the very cold weather, and they didn't have this kind of house. I sometimes I wonder, who do I say thank you to that my ancestors were survived in that country? They didn't have everything what we had today.
the south, the Navajo, and the Hopi, rich in culture, government, and art. Caves that indicate a civilization before civilizations. The Hopi elder, Thomas Banyaka, tells of his people.
Well, Hopi means peaceful people. Word Hopi is humble person, truthful. And they live in what is now called Arizona, northeast corner of Arizona, just east of Grand Canyon area. Because the Hopi believe that within that Four Corners area, four states coming together, is a very sacred spiritual center. It's surrounded by four sacred mountains. On top of them are sacred shrines that were built by our ancestors long time ago. And those mountains represents to the edges of land in four directions. So actually, Hopi land is all over this Western Hemisphere. We recognize the law of great spirits, of law of nature. And through a religious society, we're able to learn spiritual as well as things in nature, elements in nature. Before white people came, with no native people have any money system. They trade. In Hopi, we do dry farming with blending stick, with no irrigation. But we're able to survive there by planting corn, beans, melons, pumpkins.
Hundreds of independent civilizations flourished in Middle and South America. Mayans and Incas, but that's another story. They thrived for thousands of years. The estimates of how many people populated the individual sections vary. The native people have their own estimates.
Oh, the native people would have covered pretty well the entire area of North America, although not as densely populated as we would, as it is today. But nevertheless, they were well spaced out. And because they were largely hunting and gathering type of societies, they used pretty well all of the land that we now know as North America.
I have a good idea of Cherokee population, but this is from my own personal studies, and if I say it to white Americans, it sounds too outrageous. But I'm not an outrageous guy. I'm not an exaggerated guy. I think about 1 million Cherokees, minimum.
Cherokee alone?
Yeah.
And they were in what part of North America specifically?
This is another problem, but I think I can prove to any anthropologist that we were from close to Chesapeake Bay down to what is now northern Florida, all the way over through Georgia and Tennessee. Great, huge chunk of the southeast of the U.S. was originally Cherokee territory. The Indians of the Americas are the world's farmers, much more than any Asian culture or any European culture. That is our genius, I think.
In the Northeast, the Wyandot, who were later called Huron, George Seawee is almost the last survivor of his tribe, of the Columbus invasion and those that followed.
If we go back to 1492, there would have been very close to 30,000 Hurons, or Wyandot, if you prefer that term, which is more authentic. They are people that had evolved very refined social ways.
They had learned to live off the land and its animals in a kind of calm harmony. Ray LaValle, an elder at Piapot in the Capel Valley, Saskatchewan, tells of a time 500 years ago.
Living here, I guess 500 years ago was very important for us Indian people because as we were given a history that was given to us as Indian people, we always were to live with harmony with Mother Nature. we had life that was like a calendar for us, and it was very important because the animals and the flowers and the trees that you see here in this country of ours was lived with seasons, and each season was given to us to identify, and we lived in harmony with it. And all these things were telling us. The animals talk to us every day, but we don't know how to do it now today, because long ago the elders taught us how.
In the West, there were the buffalo. Before the arrival of the horse, the native people had developed a complex system of hunting and killing them by stampeding a certain number to cliff tops, harvesting only as many as were needed.
No, toch beetje. Kijk, ja, ik zie ik op mijn piska. But I just told you my name is Beaver Boy. I'm a pagan. And what you want to find out is about the buffalo jumps here. What you see right here is the main going over the cliff over here. This hole up here. Down here, you run somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000 head of buffalo. They say this buffalo jump was being used about the same time as the pyramids were getting built over on the other side of the world. This is what they claim. So out on the road over here, out on the plains over here, you're going to see somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 million buffalo.
Excuse me, you said 60 million?
60 million.
But that's
just in the local area here. You got more than that going right down into Arizona, and then right up into the north.
So suppose you wanted to cross where the buffalo were. How long would that take you?
If you're going to go across country and that buffalo just happened to be going by, then you're going to have to wait three days and 3 nights before just that one herd will pass by. This is what they claim.
Along with a harmony with the land, they had established complex relationships with each other. In the Great Plains, the Sioux, the Crow, and the Cheyenne.
There were many tribes here in this part of the world, in this hemisphere, and our tribes are nations, just like the nations of the world on the other side of the globe. So in that respect, we were no different. We traded with one another. We competed with one another for agricultural lands and for hunting, choice hunting grounds. We competed, we traded, and at times we warred. And at times we had peace. We formed alliances.
Wars did take place between various tribes and slaves were taken. War games were seen by native peoples on the prairies anyhow, quite differently. The objective was not to kill somebody, the objective was to humiliate your opponent. I think to kill somebody was so difficult to understand, to take the death of somebody, because they were put on this earth for several reasons. So certainly you could hate somebody or dislike somebody, but you could do that in different ways.
Leroy Little Bear, Blackfoot, blood, a scholar of the land.
The idea of owning the land was one of collective ownership, okay? But there's a little bit more to it than simply saying collective ownership. Because Native people think of all creation as being animate, it means then that these trees were around or have a soul in them, have a spirit. Even the rocks have spirit. In the same way that all animals, for instance, have spirit. And we all, you know, we're simply part of this much larger picture of creation.
According to Chief John Snow of the Good Stony people, who was also a minister, Indian traditions and oral history say that his people were always present in his part of the Great Island, which is the native name for the North American continent.
The mountains are very precious, sacred to my people over the years. They have gone there for vision quest, they've gone there for prayer and searching for divine guidance. So the mountains have always been a sacred area, the mountain hot springs. My people went there for healing, and the medicine men would send some of our people there for cleansing and for healing, and for dedication, rededication, and so on. You know. So it's a very special place for us.
Some of the trees that have not been desecrated have lived here for at least 800 years. What was it like in those pre-Columbian days?
You'd have to think of trees that just never ended. And I guess you'd have to think of a people that were sure of themselves and content in their own way of living. I think you probably would have found a bit of paradise there.
It wasn't Eden.
The environment easily supported all of the people, and of course, one of the densest populations anywhere in North America, Aboriginal North America, was here on this strip of land that runs down the northwest coast of British Columbia, runs down the coast of BC.
So this was the land Columbus stumbled on, even though he never touched foot on the American continent. And these were the people he said had no religion, who he said he would harvest as slaves and converts for the Queen that October day in 1492.
They would make fine servants, and they are intelligent. I believe they could easily be made Christians, for they appear to have no idols.
But Columbus was no better judge of personality than he was navigator. He converted not one Indian, and in the rape and lust that followed from his brother Diego and his men in their empty search for gold, the entire population of Arawak Indians perished, either from having their hands cut off for not producing gold dust, which did not exist, from suicide with cassava poison out of desperation, or disease imported by the exploiting whites. Perhaps 500,000 Indians perished. Some say as many as 6 million died.
The people who populated the island, that is Hispaniola, which is at present called Dominican Republic, they were forced to go out to get whatever gold they could find in the rivers, and they were given a certain quota to come up with at a specified time. And if they were not able to do that, their hands were chopped off. So they were forced to go out to give their time, forget their survival, and go to get whatever riches that could be found on the island for the Spanish people at that time. The population was wiped out very fast. In Dominican Republic or in Hispaniola, within 50 years, the population was almost completely wiped out. And they were hanged. They were hung in numbers of 13 in honor of the 12 disciples and Jesus Christ. And they were burnt with green wood so that the Spanish people could enjoy their Christ longer.
It is October 1500. After his final voyage, because of charges of mismanagement and the lack of gold, but not because of the killing of the native people, Columbus returns to Spain disgraced in chains. These were the words of Tennyson.
Chains for the admiral of the ocean, chains for him who gave a new heaven, a new earth, chains for him who pushed his prows into the setting sun and made the west east and sailed the dragon's mouth and came upon the mountains of the world and saw the rivers roll from paradise.
A great native nation vanished, the land ransacked of its wealth. It is only 8 years after the admiral has arrived to a friendly native embrace, and the age of exploration had only just begun. The brave new world seems hardly brave in the war against the Indians. It's not so much a paradise found and lost, as a paradise stumbled on, a paradise perverted, a paradise almost destroyed. The Vikings, of course, had come and gone, perhaps assuming this was no place to stay. The challenge of Columbus is soon met by others, sailing for other monarchs, but always with the same goal, gold. Giovanni Caboto, a naturalized Venetian, using the anglicized version of his name, John Cabot, sails for King Henry VII of England. He will arrive at either Newfoundland, Cape Breton, or Maine. From a third voyage, he did not return. Like most explorers, he will die disappointed. A friend said of him,
"He found new lands nowhere but on the very bottom of the sea."
John Fernandez, a Labrador or small landowner, will find his way to Labrador for Portugal. Gaspar Correal names Terra Verde or Newfoundland in 1500. The most complete description of the time will come from Giovanni de Verrazano, traveling for France, who will be the first European to enter New York Bay on the Hudson River.
The land-in situation is of goodness and beauty. This is the most beautiful people and the most civilized that we have found in this navigation.
We do not know what the natives thought of him, but we are told that Verrazano died on an island off the coast of South America in 1528, killed and eaten by Carib Indians in sight of his crew, perhaps a reaction to the exploits of Columbus. There is a manuscript of the thoughts of Jacques Cartier in 1534. By May 21, he is at Funk Island, which he calls Isle of the Birds, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Cumberland Harbor.
I landed in many places, except at Blanc-Sabian there is nothing but moss and short, stunted shrub. I am rather inclined to believe that this is the land God gave to Cain. On the 24th of the said month of July, we had a cross made 30 feet high, which was put together in the presence of a number of the Indians on the point at the entrance to the harbor, Gaspé, under the crossbar of which we fixed a shield with 3 fleur-de-lis in relief, and above it a wooden board engraved in large Gothic characters where was written, "Long live the King of France."
The bulk of all those there perished, but a few Hurons did survive to tell their side of the story. This is George Seawee.
The writings of Cartier are rather clear on that topic. He says that he describes the Stadaconians, because they were the people from Quebec City, which was Stadacona, as having a strong and immediate reaction to his planting of a cross in Gaspé. The people started gesturing, especially the chief, Donnacona, indicating to him that they were in charge of that territory. They were entrusted with the care and the political order to be respected in that territory. And of course, he didn't pay much attention to them, but they reacted, and probably they associated the sign of the cross with some kind of invasion, some kind of odd idea that was in the minds of these French people.
We did everything to make him feel at home. We give him food. We show him how to food here. And we even give them a land to live on it. We didn't try to destroy them. If we were savages, cannibals, they call us, or warlocks, I don't think any white people would be here if we were that kind of people.
The white people are still looked upon as as maybe descendants of this sun that went across the water. And the reason why Native people are very tolerant and have tolerated a lot of things that this sun, or descendants of this sun have done. But in the long run, they still say, well, maybe they're our relatives.
There was a kind of contest of cruelty. They came to conquer And caught in this war of empires were always the Indians. The Spanish were probably the most savage, attempting their own style of war against the Indians. The Spanish succeeded in planting settlements in North America during the 16th century, but the English and the French succeeded only with the help of the Indian cures. These are the words of George Seeley.
It was just a natural gesture that the Indians made, and which they would have towards any group of people. They noticed that these people had, they were suffering from some kind of lack of fresh nutrients, fresh food, and they pulled out bark from a cedar tree, or probably from a white spruce tree, and they used up the bark of a big tree in little time, and they cured these people.
Sir Walter Raleigh founded a colony of Roanoke, and it vanished. Smith tried again at Jamestown, and then the Pilgrims, and with them the Europeans, brought disease. The righteous Puritans thought of the plague as a sign that God was on their side, and one of them still mourned.
The bones and skulls made such a spectacle that as I traveled in that forest near Massachusetts, it seemed to me a newfound Golgotha.
The priests came to harvest souls, the explorers to find wealth.
When we refer back to 1609, we can say that the divisions that were opposing the alliance of tribes sided with the French, who were the Huron and the Algonquins, and on the other side, the Iroquois, was getting intensified, this division. So Champlain knew that he had to play on that division. There was a skirmish. Champlain right at once noticed or commented that the Indians didn't know anything about war, didn't know how to fight, because they wouldn't comply with his orders. And he says, I'm the commandant here, why aren't they listening to me? But the Indians were not willing to go and expose themselves and just assault this fortress. So, and they were mainly fighting by their own modes of warfare, which was to hide themselves and try to capture someone. But Champlain urged them and qualified them with being very bad warriors and not knowing anything about war from that point on. And he took other opportunities afterwards to lead battles against the Iroquois. And the Iroquois, from that moment on, had a very serious grudge against the French. They had a much stronger reason to resist alliance with the French and to turn towards the English or the Dutch, which were the people then. We know that the diseases started striking almost at the same instant that the Jesuits came back in force in 1634. So this is more than a coincidence. The Indians themselves made a direct and very quickly made a relation between the presence of the priests and the spreading of epidemics. The supposed innocence of the priests is a little more tarnished because we see that they are rejoicing, openly rejoicing, when large numbers of people succumb to the epidemics. They say, well, among the Pétain, Tionontate, the harvest is good. The harvest of souls is good. The people are dying in good numbers there. They didn't succeed in converting or baptizing people in good health until very late in the relationship they had with the Wendat. They mostly baptized dying infants or dying people, but they complained themselves very often that they had not yet, I think as late as 1641, converted or baptized one adult in good health.
The holy passion for conversion would lead the Black Robes, as they were called, to face any danger as they headed inland to build a frozen paradise in the distant woods. The Huron knew well how to survive in the cruel climate of Canada, and the Jesuits, in their search for souls, built a village for their new Christians at Ste. Marie. Within its barricades, they were segregated from the Hurons. Outside, the traditional opponents of the Hurons, the Iroquois. The Jesuits thought they had built an unconquerable fortress for Jesus. When you're in this place, it's so peaceful now.
Yes.
What do you feel when you see this graveyard here?
You know, I actually feel that these people are listening to me. That's what I really feel. They're hearing me, and they have something that they want me to say. And this is important for me to be here.
These are all Huron graves for the most part.
They are. For the most part, they say 21 people, so this would account for most of them, yeah.
So when they talk here about the martyrs, they're talking about, of course, the Jesuits.
Yes.
There's almost no talk of what happened to the native people here.
That's correct, Harry. They hardly ever mentioned them, just like they hadn't been as human as the other people. The Iroquois that came here finally in 1649 to destroy this place, they were mainly composed of Wendat traditionalists who had fled to the Iroquois or had been incorporated somehow by force, but more by their own will with the Iroquois, and were teaching the Iroquois to beware of what had happened, and that the same design was in the minds of the missionaries for the Iroquois also. The people that have actually committed the murders, if we want to call them murders, against those priests were what the priests have termed Huron renegades. That means people who had suffered the loss of their country here, that had found some salvation among the Iroquois, who were the pagans in the last analysis, in the Indians, in the Jesuits' words, and had urged their adopters to come in and destroy, because they, coming from here, they knew that the same destruction was heading out for Iroquois, the Iroquois country. So they didn't really torture these priests in any honorable way in the mentality or in the context. The one that suffered the longest martyrdom was Father Brebeuf. The others were dispatched by blows of a hatchet. Apparently they ate his heart because he had shown them a lot of courage, because this priest had come here with the express intent of dying here, martyrdom. They chose to interpret that God willed all these people to disappear because God had other plans for this land. He wanted to wipe out savagery from this land here, and that conversion would only come when so many people, which meant most of the people had died, and died about 2/3 of the original population, which means at least 20,000 people, and it's more than catastrophe. It's death of a people. It's genocide.
Bones, they are scattered, but his spirit, it lingers on and on, on and on.
And so a great nation, the Hurons, perished. The Iroquois grew strong. The white man moved west, and a way of life was destroyed. The battle of empires will be fought also with Indian blood, maneuvering tribe against tribe. It is September 13, 1759. 2 champions will die on the plains of Abraham, creating 3 solitudes. The fur traders and settlers head west, assuming it to be, of course, empty space. The living Indian culture is ignored or destroyed. Progress is a kind of punishment for guiding hands. It was convenient to think of all Indians as savages, and thus progress, European style, was of course an advantage. The settlers working their way west simply ignored the tribes if they could.
If you were going to a land, a beautiful land, and try to take that, you would have to condemn the culture there, the language, everything they did, because we're superior and we'll replant that and do away with the savages and make a almost a utopia there, you know.
When possible, they used native skills once they had taken their lands in the east. And this was the case of Phil Fontaine's family. He's the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
They had moved westward with the trade. They were the canoe. They were the paddlers. They were the, you know, they did the work. And so anyone that moved out here moved pretty well in the same way. If they didn't come with the church, they came with the fur trade. This area was noted for its prime stands of birch. So it is a place where our people and others would congregate to repair their canoes or build new canoes. And during the height of the fur trade, of course, a good place for, because it is a departure point for pemmican, the pemmican supplies that moved out, see, with the traders and the Indians that worked on the fur trade. There's fierce competition in our area between the Norwest Company, the Hudson's Bay, and the free traders, and the churches. You had smallpox and other diseases, and I recall reading about some of the epidemics that would move just so quickly, you know, through the lake. You know, and most of our people, of course, if not all, lived by water, the Winnipeg River, Lake Winnipeg, and any waterway, because that was their way of traveling.
The settlers brought with them the animals that could change the ways of the Plains Indians. Caught in Paint by Gerald McMaster, a Cree. When people think of Indians, they think of horses. It seems to be just a part of...
Immediately, yes. We call them mistatim, or big dog. And I felt that when I was thinking about the term mistatim, as you know, or at least archaeologists inform us that they've actually found skeletons of an animal the size of a dog, you know, with cloven hooves, or a hoof, not cloven hoof, but rather a hoof, which existed in prehistoric times. And I think that they felt that the horse obviously disappeared, but you know, whether or not it actually went back towards Europe that way through the Bering Strait, it's unknown. But anyhow, there was an indication by archaeologists that a horse existed. So in fact, that the horse may have existed here, and could be an old term from way back then, but so you have this return of the horse, return of the big dog, and it completely changed the lifestyle of my ancestors overnight. And the Sioux Indian is the most popular Indian in all the world. And so that was the image that I saw. And primarily it was they that wore this peculiar looking headdress with feathers arranged in the circle, and they wore it on the head. And there are numerous native tribes around Canada and the United States that have adopted this feathered headdress format, maybe not out of eagle feathers, but out of feathers. There is a hierarchy of birds, and the eagle represents the highest on this hierarchy. And that because the eagle flies the highest, the eagle then in turn represents being the closest to the Great Spirit, or to the spiritual realm. And so that's why it becomes important, because it's believed that an eagle also is a messenger
and carries your thoughts and that and prayers.
When the settlers come in, the Europeans come in, they hunted the buffalo for the hides. The hides were worth $100 back in them days. And they were selling them down east to factories where they use them for belt drives, according to what they were telling me. There were so many buffalo that it was just like a sport, where the white people hunt them for game. Some took the heads for trophies, but most of it, the meat was wasted out on the land. They figured if they do away with the buffalo, so will they do away with the Indian, because that's the Indian's main source of food, his main source of clothes, his main source of his teepee. But the Indian, he's still here, the Blackfeet Indian is still here to tell the story of the history of his people, how he survived from the beginning and right up to the present day. Today, he's still here, and I'm proud to talk about my people and how he survived in this buffalo jump, which you see here today. The Indian, he respects the land. Mother Earth is where your body comes from.
The great Rocky Mountains becomes a barrier for the Western trek. Beyond them, a complex civilization flourished. Captain James Cook, an English naval officer and explorer, lands on Vancouver Island in 1778. Captain George Vancouver surveys English Bay, the present site of the city of Vancouver. It is 1792. The intruders are greeted by the inhabitants. Some have said, perhaps that was a mistake. Bill Wilson.
The reality is that our hospitality, which is the integral part of our culture, prohibited us from killing them. And they wouldn't have survived without us.
The explorer found the coast was populated by many tribes.
People living in quite small communities up and down the coast, being totally dependent on resources from primarily the sea, and to a lesser extent the land, utilizing those resources without waste, because people believed that if you mistreated the animals or the trees, that they just might go away and you wouldn't have them to enjoy anymore. White people thought that we worshipped totem poles. We didn't. They were like a coat of arms. They told people who you were and where you belonged. There wasn't worship in the way that white people talk about worship. I think more there was simply being thankful for what surrounded you, for what you were given. Respect for that environment, knowing that there weren't just human beings in this world, that there were supernatural creatures who must be treated with respect. Things like thunderbirds and wild people of the woods, of the ocean, cannibal birds. Those are not ordinary creatures, and yet they were very much part of ceremonial life. A thunderbird looks like an eagle. except that it has these kinds of horns. It feeds on whales. When it flaps its wings, it causes thunder. When it blinks its eyes, it causes lightning.
The missionary made his target the unique ceremony of potlatch.
The word potlatch is from trade jargon that was used in the early days on this coast, called Chinook, and it means to give. And potlatches were and are given still to mark special occasions, special events, marriage, to mourn the dead, to name children, to celebrate the raising of a pole.
Why was potlatch banned? I don't understand that.
Basically, I think it was pretty heavy competition for what the missionaries were trying to do. When people were at potlatches for weeks and months, they weren't going to this church. Their children weren't in this school. They were carrying on as they always had.
The potlatch wasn't a ceremonial institution, nor was it a religious institution. The potlatch was all of those things and much more. So you could call it a kind of total social phenomenon.
We had such a strong culture, and we had such a strong religion that they sought the need from government and other people to outlaw the potlatch. And they actively outlawed the potlatch in the manner that you might say to a Jewish person, you can't go to the synagogue, I'm sorry, or to a Catholic person, you cannot have Mass. That's what they did to us. And the attempt really was to eliminate the strong foundation of our culture, which is the potlatch, to make us non-Indians. I would think there had to be 500,000 or 1 million people here. Now, think about that. That's half the population of the province of British Columbia, most of which was simply eliminated by diseases.
Brought on by the white man, of course.
Yeah. The common cold apparently killed as many people as smallpox did. Think about that. The common cold, because there were no defenses to it. There had absolutely no resistance to those kind of things. But clearly things like measles and smallpox and tuberculosis killed thousands and thousands of people. Those diseases we had no immunity to.
I had my first look at clear cutting on my trip to Vancouver Island, and I wanted very much for you to reflect a little bit about this process of how the wood is cut, how the trees are destroyed.
It's very upsetting, especially here.
Clear-cut logging has destroyed any kind of grounds for people to think that in fact they live in one of the most beautiful places in the world. That's destroyed. You can't pretend that anymore. And people, of course, in the past had language constructed, ideology constructed, philosophy constructed to support their boastfulness about their home. People felt good about being from this area. People felt good about the fact that there were whales everywhere splashing on beaches, and we have songs that talk about that.
There was no physical genocide that's practiced in Canada, as far as I know, in the Western Canada. But they had much more subtle means of destroying the people, and it was as though an invading army came into Vancouver or Toronto or someplace else and said, you have to give up your churches, which wouldn't be a big thing these days, but would be before, and stop stop living as extended family and build individual houses for nuclear family use, and burn all your books and never speak your language again, and every convention by which you had governed your life would be forbidden to you, and you had to start in all over again.
There was a sense of urgency that caught painters such as George Catlin of America and Paul Kane of Canada to paint the West before it was lost, before the white man had destroyed it all. In contrast to the explorers who talked of the Aborigines as savages, Catlin saw them as a people deprived of their freedom through the expansion of the so-called European civilization. He crusaded for them and spoke of them lovingly.
I love a people who have always made me welcome to the best they had, who are honest without laws, who have no jails and no poorhouse, never take the name of God in vain, who worship God without a Bible, and I believe that God loves them also, who are free from religious animosities, who have never raised a hand against me or stolen my property, where there was no law to punish either, who never fought a battle with white men except on their own ground. And how I love a people who don't live for the love of money.
Also, by the middle of the 19th century, the photographer was beginning to record the Indian. For so many in the East, the West became real. There were conflicting cultures, a clash of cultures. The paintings of the day depicted the settler as noble and his adventure as God-blessed.
Shortly after Confederation, when John A. Macdonald, in fear of the United States annexing what is now Western Canada, promised to build a railroad westward to British Columbia. And it was as though the government, in their hurry to build this railroad, in a way almost forgot, hey, there's some Indians out there, how are we going to deal with them? And the Indians were kind of in the way of the railroad building. So they ended up signing a whole bunch of treaties with the Indians for promises from the, as a means of getting promises from the Indians that they were not going to interfere with the railroad building.
John A. Macdonald. Certainly my mother really liked this painting. For her, I thought that it represented that a period of time which she had to live through, a very difficult period when most of her life was in fact within that period where religion and culture was denied, and so she had to seek alternative lifestyle, and she had to look for jobs and couldn't maintain that traditional lifestyle. But I think she saw me as an opportunity of somebody saying something, being very direct and talking about a position Native people are in and have been in for 100 or 125 years, really. That he didn't understand us, and neither did we understand him.
Some Indian chiefs, such as Tecumseh, warned,
where today are the Pequots? Where the Narrangasets, the Mohawks, the Pocanets, and many other once powerful tribes of our people? They have vanished before the avarice and oppression of the white man as a snow before a summer sun.
Our civilization is destroyed, or is seriously wounded, and our resistance continues at the same time. We say those things in the fact of being alive.
The Indian became game, like animals, for the new breed of cowboy.
Now, instead of them being the hunters, a lot of them became the hunted, particularly in the States. They had a hard time.
They called it the Trail of Tears. Under armed guard, the Indians were herded off their traditional lands. 16,000 Cherokees were moved this way, and as many as a quarter of them died on the journey, and they were dumped into Oklahoma.
Every Indian nation in the U.S. certainly has had its own Trail of Tears. All of us in the Southeast, originally from the Southeast, especially the people who are officially called the 5 civilized tribes, which means the other tribes are what? Savages? We were quickly in the way. We were in the way early on. From the 1820s through the 1840s, the 5 civilized tribes of the U.S. Southeast were forcibly removed to Oklahoma Territory with a huge loss of life, forced marches, as other Indian people later had to do. We were the first to go through it. But we weren't the first to have a Trail of Tears, certainly. Beginning about 1600, every 10 years, we lost half of our population. All Indians on the East Coast. Every 10 years, you lose half of your population. For 300 years. And finally, you wind up with not even 98% of your original population. And what that does to you culturally, you don't really recognize. If Canada today lost 98% of its population, or half of its population, or a third of its population, it means losing half of your doctors, half of your teachers, half of your scientists, half of your children. It means a cultural loss, not just a physical loss. That war in the U.S. was more than 200 years long. Constant battling at us, constantly killing us.
Some Indian bands were able to fight against overpowering odds of superior gunpowder. After one battle, 303 Sioux were condemned to death by the new Americans. Since they had no rights, they had no lawyer at the military trial. Abraham Lincoln himself intervenes. He reduces the number to be hanged to 38. It is the day after Christmas. In the moon, when the deer shed their horns, 38 are hung. One of those who had saved a white woman's life during the raid. So the great emancipator actually gives the order to America's greatest mass execution. There will be many meetings between white leaders and Indians, many treaties, and many pleas that will not be heard.
Our people believing that the other side was just and honorable and would respect their own laws, would respect the agreements, were really fooled into that. And that was not a fatal mistake, but a real error in judgment that has cost us dearly.
We know that if we do not sell, the white man may come with guns and take our land. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clearing, and humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people. The rocky crests, the juices of the meadows, the body heat of the pony and man, all belong to the same family. So when the great chief in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land, he asks much of us.
I have heard that you intend to settle us on the reservation near the mountains. I don't want to settle. I love to roam over the prairies. There I feel free and happy, but when we settle down, we grow pale and die.
I was born upon the prairie where the winds blew free and there was nothing to break the light of the sun. I was born where there were no enclosures and where everything drew a free breath. I want to die there and not within walls.
And so we've come to this frontier. Next, we'll see what happens when we go to the Grand Canyon, when we move on to Wounded Knee and the Custer battlefield, and we tell the story up to date in this, the War Against the Indians.
Navajos in their religious saying that they consider that the earth is their mother and the sun is the father. See, the sun sense powerful energy from the sun, and it hits them.
The war against the Indians has a monumental setting and a place of almost mystic majesty in the American Southwest. The Grand Canyon, a place to contemplate history. The writer Samuel Butler said, "God cannot alter the past, but historians can." Now, we have been told and retold the European version of the land and legends of how we came to be here. History is a set of lies agreed upon, said Napoleon. And the poet William Carlos Williams added, history begins for us with murder and enslavement, not with discovery. The raw myths of our past. But the geography cannot be molded into convenient historical truth. The caves are still there, parched by the sun, a permanent record. There have been people living here since before time was recorded. Philosopher and artist Carl Gorman.
The Navajos call him a Nasaza. A Nasaza is a Navajo word. A Na means stranger. Zazi, Zazi, Saza. That means strange relatives. A Nasaza.
Pueblo historian Joe Sando. Just how long ago was it that the Pueblo was first seen here?
In this area, the farthest that we've been able to decipher is 10,000 for many years, but recently some professor found some material which indicates 40,000 years ago. That is down south of here because the Pueblo people came from the south. And we came out from the Mexico, maybe the Tehuacan area of Mexico after the cultivation of corn, which was 34,000 BC. And after corn was cultivated, that made it possible for people to begin to travel, take corn with them.
The cliff dwellers left their caves, an ancient version of solar heating, and moved to villages. Why? A mystery. It was about the time of the arrival of the Spaniards, the conquistadors. Governor Herman Agoya in his village of San Juan.
About
500 years ago, you would have seen two-story homes, maybe 200 to 300 people here, and you would have seen my ancestors living a very simple life, you know, earning or surviving through farming and hunting and celebrating life through their ceremonies.
With the arrival of the Spanish, the brutal tone of battle was set from the start, says Joe Santo.
Like any European, the attitude at the beginning was that they were going to dominate and do away with our culture and substitute and give us their culture. But it didn't last because they instituted some of their programs that they had in Europe, like the Encomienda and the Repartimiento. And they supplemented another idea there that they would do away with our religion and give us theirs. And the Pueblos took it until 1680. In 1680, they revolted and threw the Spaniards out for 12 years. And when the Spaniards came back in 1692, it was with a different attitude. Consequently, today, we are the last of the Native Americans of North America who maintain a greater part of their culture as a result of that expulsion of the Spaniards at that time.
And how did the Navajo get along with the Spanish?
They used to call them Hispanic, and they were really friendful. But afterwards, the army came, the Spanish army came, and they were really the rough one. So the Navajo started fighting them, and they fought for about 200 years. They never could conquer the Navajos. They used this hit and run fighting technique, and the Navajos thought that was the end of it. They thought this was their land, and they were going to live here peacefully. But the government, the United States government, took over the Navajo land again.
The United States government calls it manifest destiny. It is the spring of 1862, 370 years after Columbus, a period of almost continuous war. The American government sends in General James Carleton with stars on his shoulder to command the Bluecoats, the California column. He has a great passion for their land, and like Columbus, for its gold. These are Carleton's words.
The princely realm, magnificent pastorale and mineral country. As for the Navajos, they are wolves that run through the mountains and must be subdued. The men are to be slain wherever they can be found. The women and children may be taken as prisoners.
With his lieutenant, Kit Carson, once a friend of the Indians, Carleton pursues and stars the Navajos. The Navajos cannot believe that Carson condones scalping, which was introduced by the Spanish and which they consider to be very savage.
Carleton, he was stationed in Santa Fe, and he was told to get into this Navajo country and see what we could do. And he was one of these guys that really was crazy for gold. And he wrote back to, he was he toured the Navajo country, a certain part, and he wrote back to Washington and told him that the Navajos were sitting on precious stone, and what he meant was gold. And the only way we could get to these precious stones is to get the Navajos off their land. Well, they finally drove the Navajos to Fort Sumner and held them there 4 years. From Albuquerque is 300 miles due south. They lost quite a number of, especially older people, you know. That there was his idea so that he said that we could get to the gold or that precious stone, he said, to get the Navajos off the land.
But the Navajo made peace pretty early on with the American government, right?
Oh yeah, they signed a treaty. I don't know how many treaties the Navajos signed with the government, but they're all broken.
A requiem is said for the American intrusion and the long, mad march on which so many will die by Chief Manuelito, and a sacred prayer.
In a sacred manner, I live to the heavens. I gazed. In a sacred manner, I live. My horses are many.
The Navajos will return to their land, fewer in number, with less territory. The famed warrior Geronimo will speak for his warriors, the Apache.
I was praying to the light and to the darkness, to God and to the sun, to let me live quietly there with my family. I don't know what the reason was that the people should speak badly of me. Very often, there are stories in the newspapers that I am to be hanged. I don't want that anymore. When a man tries to do right, such stories ought not to be put in the newspapers. There are very few of my men left now. They have done some bad things, but I want them all rubbed out now, and let us never speak of them again. There are very few of us left. When I was young, I walked all over this country, east and west, and saw no other people than the Apaches. After many summers, I walked again and found another race of people had come to take it. How is it? Why is it that the Apaches wait to die? That they carry their lives on their fingernails? They roam over the hills and plains and want the heavens to fall on them. The Apaches were once a great nation. There are now but few, and because of this, they want to die and so carry their lives on their fingernails.
Geronimo will die a prisoner of war, and the battle was not yet over for others and elsewhere on the great island of North America. There have been many poems, songs, paintings, and films about the battle that took place here at Little Bighorn on a blistering June Sunday in 1876.
The Indians were camped over here and they were celebrating. They just completed an annual Sundance to the east here, a few miles, and they were out hunting and they were coming together for an annual social function where they sing and dance.
Many versions of one story. Here on another Sunday, on a hot summer day, told by Dale Goes Wartime's Kindness, a crow.
The United States Cavalry, under the direction of George Armstrong Custer, came over here and attacked a peaceful village of Sioux, Arapahoes, and Cheyennes. Basically, that's what happened in 1876 on that day. But the events leading up to it are controversial in many respects because of what different authors and so-called historians have analyzed as the results leading up to that assault on the Indians by the U.S. Cavalry. Gold was discovered in the Black Hills, the sacred land of the Dakota people, And that was one of the driving forces behind the events that led up to the attack on the Indians in 1876. The Sioux resisted the government's attempts to take away the Black Hills because of the discovery of gold. They resisted orders and demands to get off of their ancestral homelands and to change their way of life. They mutilated and they dismembered infants, American Indian infants. They cut their arms and legs and heads off. They bashed in the heads of infants. The military did that. And civilians, citizens of this country did that to American Indians. And then they just twisted the story around, as is the style of some historians and non-Indians. That's what they want to believe, because they're trying to justify in their own mind that the shame that they did in the treatment of American Indians somehow can be justified. But no matter how hard they try, if they're true people, if they have any link to a God, they know that what they did to the American Indians was shameful and unforgivable, and they can't really accept that, so they have to twist things around and make it look like the Indian was a savage, when in fact the Indian was more of a peaceful creature of nature who lived in harmony with nature. And the story that American Indians continually scalped non-Indians and did horrible things, terrible mutilations to them. If that did in fact happen, and I'm not denying that it may have happened, but it was a result of what the non-Indian did to the American Indian first and foremost. And it was more like a response, and it was based on anger and love and emotionalism for the people that were massacred and mutilated and scalped.
Was Custer just a bad soldier that he seemed to led himself into this massacre? That's what it was?
I think he was misguided, and it just depends upon your own interpretation of history. In my view, from my understanding and reading, he was crazy. The soil you see here is not ordinary soil. The top of the earth is Crow Indian. It's the dust of the bones and the blood of our ancestors. To get to the real earth, you have to go through the upper portion. The upper portion is Crow. And that was said by Curly, Crow Indian.
The cry for vengeance for the decisive defeat of the U.S. cavalry was spread. It is a stunning, if temporary, victory for the native people. Of the leaders in battle that day at the Little Bighorn, Crazy Horse will become the stuff of legend. Even though trapped and dead at 35, his image blasted in rock in the sacred, stolen Black Hills, not far from the place of presidents at Mount Rushmore. Sitting Bull will seek temporary refuge in Canada, the land of the grandmother, Queen Victoria, before surrendering in the United States. Custer will become the controversial subject of investigations, books, films, and artists like Gerald McMaster.
It was reported following the Little Bighorn that Custer's hat size was unusually large. Custer, I think, represented a number of things in two native peoples about Western society, ego. It also represented the police state. It represented in movies, as I mentioned, when Indians get unruly, you always have the cavalry coming to the rescue to save the day. It also signified this cowboy and Indian image. It was us against them.
Because the government's policy in the States, which was not unlike what it was the case here in Canada, they wanted to move the Indians onto the reservation so that they would be out of the way, which would give freedom to the Europeans, to the government to expand westward.
On only 2 occasions were there major fights between the whites and the Indians in Canada, in Manitoba during 1869 and in western Saskatchewan during 1885.
And I remember in school studying Louis Riel back in high school, and I think we had about a paragraph and a half on the man. And then he was told to us as being a rebel and a madman. And that unfortunately isn't true, and I knew at that time it wasn't true.
Each time the battle was led by the Métis Louis Riel. He was only 41 when he died on the gallows of Regina with the Lord's Prayer on his lips.
Notre Père qui es aux cieux, que votre nom soit sanctifié, que votre règne arrive, que votre volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel.
Just after Christmas in the year 1890, an era ended here at Wounded Knee in South Dakota, and stark grave markers under a lonely flag of truce are silent reminders of a terrible battle recalled by Dwayne Brewer.
100 years ago, Chief Bigfoot and his band of followers were coming to the Pine Ridge Agency. They were intercepted by the 7th Cavalry, escorted to this site. Of course, Bigfoot was coming in with under the flag of surrender, and they were asked to give up their weapons. Many of them did, but a shot was fired, and the cavalry began to open up on Bigfoot and his followers. Bigfoot was killed. Of course, Bigfoot was very sick and had pneumonia, and was, didn't resist at all, but he was still killed. Troops opened up on the people, and the Indians, of course, his followers began to have hand-to-hand battles with some of the troops, and of course they had the Hotchkiss guns up on top of the hill up here, and they began to open up on the people. A lot of the Bigfoot's people ran down into a ravine over here. Many of them didn't get that far. They were shot by the Hotchkiss guns. There are stories out that the 7th Cavalry was getting revenge for the Custer battle. We know it today as a massacre.
Were soldiers ever punished for committing this crime?
Never punished. They were awarded medals for what they done here. Massacred 187 people.
100 years ago. Now, this was, I think, the last Indian War?
The last Indian War.
A world ended that day at Wounded Knee.
They don't know what they've taken. Well, his dignity is gone. The bones, they are scattered, but his spirit, it lingers on.
There was no hope on earth, and God seemed to have forgotten us. Some said they saw the Son of God. Others did not see him. If he had come, he would do some great things as he had done before. We doubted it because we had seen neither him nor his works. The people did not know. They did not care. They snatched at the hope. They screamed like crazy men to him for mercy. They caught at the promise they heard he had made. The white men were frightened and called for soldiers. We had begged for life, and the white men thought we wanted theirs. We heard that soldiers were coming. We did not fear. We hoped that we could tell them our troubles and get help. A white man said the soldiers meant to kill us. We did not believe it, but some were frightened and ran away to the Badlands by Red Cloud.
Tell me why.
I would like to reflect on the words of Chief Joseph. I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. The old men are all dead. It is the young men who say yes or no. He who led on the young men is dead. It is cold, and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want to have time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. I have heard talk and talk, but nothing is done. Good words do not last long unless they amount to something. Words do not pay for my dead people. They do not pay for my country, now overrun by white men. Good words will not give my people good health and stop them from dying. Good words will not get my people a home where they can live in peace and take care of themselves. I am tired of talk that comes to nothing. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and broken promises. You might as well expect the rivers to run backward as that any man who was born a free man should be content when penned up and denied liberty to go where he pleases. I have asked some of the great white chiefs where they get their authority to say to the Indian that he shall stay in one place while he sees white men going wherever they please. They cannot tell me. Let me be a free man, free to travel, free to stop, free to work, free to trade where I choose, free to choose my own teachers, free to follow the religion of my fathers. And I will obey every law or submit to the penalty. These are the words of Chief Joseph.
When the eloquent orator, Chief Joseph, died in exile, the Indian agency physician reported the cause of death as a broken heart. The 20th century will introduce the cigar store Indian. Tricked, caged, confined, he will reluctantly pose as a relic of an imagined savage time. The chief keeper of the display Indian is an entrepreneur called Buffalo Bill.
What is the significance of Buffalo Bill to the native person? Is he a symbol of kind of a bizarre time?
It was, as the title indicates, the Wild West. I think that the Indian saw the West as quite wild, like the West is captured by Western civilization. And whereas Western civilization saw the Indian as quite wild, and again, as indicated in the terminology, and he was wild, the wild savage, and so they each was looking at each other as quite wild. And in this particular one, I was looking at Buffalo Bill, and in just that name, Buffalo Bill, who had co-opted this idea that he was in fact the person that represented Hollywood at its earliest, so that he would relate to his non-native audience. The man And of course, I think we're all quite familiar with the Buffalo Bill and the Wild West shows. And in them, he hired a lot of native peoples to work with him, primarily Sioux. And as I understand it, the famous leader, shaman, elder, Tatanka Eotanka, was also in the show. Tatanka Eotanka is Lakota for Sitting Bull. It sort of further put nails in the coffins of Indian culture by displaying native peoples this way.
Packed in plastic, some symbols of native authority and faith become distorted and confused. The 20th century is for the North American Indian, a time when governments try to wash out Indianness, an attempt to subvert the native faith, to eliminate his language and convince him that the European civilization is somehow superior. In Canada, he is called a ward of the crown. He is told all he has to do is reject his history, and he will somehow be taken care of. It is a twisted truth, and it finds its most offensive form in the residential school. Basil Johnson is a historian of his people. He wrote a book about his personal experience in residential schools, Indian School Days.
The reason why I was removed from my family is that my mother and father were separated. And this gave the clergy and the Indian Affairs branch an opportunity to remove me from home to this school so that eventually I would be so assimilated I would not go back. One of the factors, of course, that is forgotten in the whole business is the suffering, the anguish endured and inflicted upon women whose children were taken away from them.
Must have been agony.
My mother used, you know, she never said a great deal. She said, I cried. You know how many nights did she cry, my grandmother? How many other women cried? And how many nights did they cry? To have an agency come along and say to them, we're taking 2 of your children or all of your children. And there's not a thing that those women could do. I think I started to suspect that something was wrong the very first day that I was there when I was, my clothing was taken away from me, and I was issued a uniform consisting of a beige shirt and a beige corduroy trousers and boots, and had my hair shorn. I began to feel maybe I was given away. Maybe I wasn't wanted. And that doubt was almost reinforced. At least something else was put on top of it. And that is the teaching of the church that you're a worthless person, that you're a sinner.
You called yourself inmate 43. So
I was. That was my number. We all had numbers.
So you really felt as if you were in jail, it sounds as if you're saying.
Well, that's what it was. It was a damn prison for doing nothing. And it was the general belief, not only with the Catholic Church, but also with the Anglican Church and with the Methodist Church and Presbyterian and a number of other churches, that punishment was good for everybody. And there were There were things, you know, a lot worse than strappings. There was a blow on the head with a fist, a kick in the ass with a heavy boot, a fist we knocked down.
Was there any sexual abuse?
There was. There was. Hell, Mount Catherine was, you know, 20 years behind time. And a lot of that occurred way back in the, well, as early as the 30s and the 20s. And this is why Native people hated those institutions so damn much. They never said anything about this because nobody was going to believe you.
Myself, I got away, you know, with a lot. For a variety of reasons, but yes, I did see an awful lot of abuse, physical abuse. Some kids just had it real bad. You know, girls getting their heads shaved and stuff like that.
Head shaved for what purpose?
For doing minor, you know, relatively minor infractions.
Was there sexual abuse too?
Yes, there was.
One thing that I should make very clear is that sexual abuse is one part of this whole abusive experience. And I experienced sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, and it went on throughout the entire time I was in residential school.
Métis artist Jim Logan paints the agony.
This painting's about basically the rounding up of our children in small villages at wherever we may have been. This one particularly is depicting a village of Ross River in Yukon Territory, where trucks came in and lists were given, I guess, to the priests before, and the names were called out, and they had to go. They had to leave their families and go. It was the law.
So it must have been a terrible thing for the women.
It was terrible for everyone. You know, I got a picture. In the picture there, you see a grandma crying in the background. In the foreground, you got a young child crying also. It lets you know this is an ongoing situation, that the grandma also experienced it, and the young child is also experiencing it now and is going to experience it in the future. I guess in a lot of cases, children ran away at this time of the year, and they're always rounded up. They'd wait in the villages for days for these kids to come out of the bush until they're basically starved out or chilled out by the coming of frost in that time of the year. And they wouldn't relent. They grabbed those kids and make sure that they attend the school, because it was, at that time, it was the law. There was no way about it. No way about getting the kids to stay.
No escape, really.
No escape. No. And all of a sudden they were told that the spiritualism that they believed in was evil and not good, and that the only way for them to get to heaven was to believe in Christ. And through that system, they realized that they were indeed savages, and they were indeed a lower class of human being. Unfortunately, most of them took it to heart. Every week or so, the girls would save up money and they go to town with the nun, of course, and they go in and they would buy this makeup and sneak it out. Oh, every once in a while they go for walks up in the bushes behind the residential school, and they'd run up way ahead the nun, and they'd run into the bush and they try on this makeup.
The punishment and the penance for the girls. Crimes of loneliness. The pea parade, carrying urine-soaked sheets over their heads, crying and praying for forgiveness.
Probably the most powerful one is that one called Night Visit. It's a true story of a fellow I know, and how this priest used to come into the boys' dormitory, and he'd just pick and choose the boys that he wanted to fondle that night, and nobody could say anything because no one would believe them anyways. It was a terror to some of the boys. Some of the boys, of course, couldn't sleep.
Escape is difficult, according to Thompson Highway.
I think there are elements essential of certain fundamental features of Christian theology. which are at complete odds with native theology, which essential, fundamental differences that have had a tremendous impact on our lives.
Senator Bill Standing Ready of the White Bear Band from Carlisle, Saskatchewan, is critical of the conflict between the feather and the cross.
Even the churches, they crucify the man that they're supposed to respect, eh? Now they're having all kinds of trouble, wars and burning the country. That's where it's coming from. Because they didn't respect themselves. They thought they were higher than what the Creator sent down here.
The restrictions imposed by the white government involves the banning of many native customs.
I think that varies from tribe to tribe. Some have pierced the skin to show their sacrifice, their dedication, and offering of themselves.
And it's an attempt to find revival or something?
It's an attempt to, first of all, to show appreciation to the Creator for life. They don't only pray for themselves, the Sundance Maker. We'll pray for the tribe, we'll pray for the animals, we'll pray for the environment. And we'll ask the Creator for a blessing on the earth, and if that happens, then all those who inhabit the earth will benefit, you know. That's the whole concept of the Sundance and the philosophy and the teaching behind that. We always had that freedom of religion. But when the Europeans came over, the very people who were searching for freedom of religion, when they came over, our freedom ended. I think a lot of the native teachings will complement the Christian teaching in that we're to respect God's creation, and that doesn't mean only the human beings, but we must respect that other creation.
The native person has been able to somehow accommodate and tolerate other religions, even if it has not been a reciprocal arrangement. Today, on Manitoulin Island, at the Catholic service, the feather is there, along with the cross, and the soft smell of sweetgrass replaces the traditional incense.
People don't realize that. It wasn't until 1949 we were considered citizens of the province of British Columbia, and it wasn't until 1960 we were considered citizens of this country. So we were wards of the government, treated as children, and they had to have a Department of Indian Affairs, you know, to minister to us. And instead of being the helping hand that it was supposed to be, I'm afraid it became probably the most destructive institute in the country next to religion that's ever been imposed upon our people. I mean, the reserves were run as concentration camps by the Department of Indian Affairs, and I'm afraid it hasn't changed much. I've said that the Department of Indian Affairs makes the CIA look like Boy Scouts compared to the internal manipulation that they've been able to engage in. And I find it completely disgusting. I get very, very angry about it. If I was the Prime Minister, I would simply strike it down and give the money to the Indians.
So the Indian agent was, in fact, like a dictator, right?
He was a god. He was a god, and he acted as a god. He signed the checks. You see, the purpose of the department, as well as the potlatch laws and all the other federal laws, were to force us off the resources, force us off of the land, so that they could be exploited.
But the great issue is the land.
When you go to most native languages, they classify everything, or most everything, as being animate. okay? Since the trees are animate, as I've said, they have spirit. Since they have spirit, that's the same as me.
How much land is really contested? I keep seeing different figures. They say that one figure says 64% of Canada really belongs to the Indian. Is that correct? Is that?
Well, I don't think 64% is correct. It's all of Canada. Why? Because...
All of Canada belongs to the Indians?
Yes. Why? Well, because if we can follow a recent Supreme Court decision that was decided back in 1983, referred to as the Guerin case, or commonly referred to as the Musqueam case, dealing with a small Indian tribe outside the city limits of Vancouver. In that court case, the Supreme Court of Canada said that the Indian source of title to the land is from time immemorial. Okay. Secondly, they said the underlying presumptive title in Canada belongs to the Indians.
Member of Manitoba Parliament, Elijah Harper, echoes a call for understanding.
When we talk about the treaties, that when our forefathers signed the treaties, it made us, in a sense, landowners, that we transferred the land over to the government. And that's why most of our great-grandfathers, when they signed the treaties, that their view was that they shared the land and resources with the newcomers that arrived here, that it should benefit everybody.
Basically, though, you see the frustration has been building up over the years now. Incidents like Oka do happen, and they'll probably continue happening until something happens to let off the steam.
We are the Iroquois, we're proud, we are strong. We've held on to our culture now. Oh,
The misunderstandings were bound to lead to confrontation. In Canada, the place was Oka. It is the summer of 1990.
They know the way.
Coming in.
What kind of people are you? There's children here and you're shooting tear gas at us. We're not armed and you're aiming your weapons at us. What kind of people are you?
Just go for it. That's the root of all the evil, right there. That is what's killing our people. These people here who don't give a shit but hitting a ball around the damn field.
The battle is over a golf course to be built on an Indian graveyard, and television images tell the world of a modern Indian war.
My orders are to come here and establish checkpoint Echo on this junction, and that's my order only.
It's the feeling of the young, and it's the knowledge of the old. There are many lessons in the legends that are told. Deep in the heart, deep in the mind, beneath the great white pine.
I think that it's important to bring out all the atrocities that have occurred, because not too many people know what actually happened to the natives of the Americas, beginning with the arrival of Columbus. Native people were almost completely annihilated, either through wars or through diseases that were brought by the outsiders. And so there's a great deal of documented atrocities that we hardly know about. And so this year, 1992, the Indian people, both from Central, South, and the upper hemisphere, are bringing those things out. And I think it's just a matter of letting people know what happened. And today, the Indian people, I think it's a miracle that we have managed to survive. We've paid a dear price for the right. It's a constant battle, right from the beginning. The moment that Columbus set foot on this land, it's been a constant struggle to maintain our identity, our language, and our way of life.
Ojibwe artist Carl Beam.
And I try to carry on the notion of Columbus sailing as a voyage. And if you continue that notion, I would say that the voyage is still not over. We are still, in fact, voyaging. To what? I don't know.
Manitoulin Island artist James Simon Mishabinijima paints a final warning.
Let's say for an example, like what we're doing to the water. We're the next on the chain link. If we destroy the water, we're destroying ourselves. Like their body's full of like blood, you would say, salt, water, you would say. And you need that sustenance, the water itself, because grass, right down to what you eat, that's what we need, the water to feed it also. To hydrate itself, we're using it to destroy Mother Earth. Like say, you're not taking this forest into another forest. We're not taking care of it, really. You know, like we're making things bad, that's bad for Mother Earth, using this force of Mother Earth, you would say.
And if the fish go, then who goes after the fish? What's the next in the chain?
Man. Well, you can say also what they call it, the plant, the life itself would go. But man is the one who's going to be sick. Like we're so far ahead, we're too fast as we're living. Everything is, you're not thinking about what you're doing on Earth itself.
Cherokee artist Jimmy Durham sounds an alarm.
It's the tailpipe of a car, tailpipe and a muffler. And there's another piece there that's a steering wheel on a base. I call them artifacts of the future. And I imagine some far distant future when some archaeologists dug up those things and that they were made by a people who had heard of a myth of white people. That there was this ancient tribe called white people who drove things called automobiles. And this later tribe takes the ruins of these automobiles and makes fetishistic objects. And then much later, other archaeologists dig up those artifacts and try to imagine, were there really ever any white people? What was the white civilization like?
And the byproducts of the Columbus enterprise? Astronauts tell us clear-cutting scars can be seen from the moon. Today, rainforest in the Western Hemisphere, originally at 3.4 billion acres, is down to 1.6 billion. Going at the rate of 166 square miles a day. At least 140 major animal and bird species have become extinct since 1492. Wilderness areas have decreased by 96%.
So now, looking back 500 years after Columbus, are you optimistic that the life for the Aboriginal person is going to improve here?
Well, probably my best answer is that I think it's coming this way because I have met with world-renowned scientists who are asking about the Indian way, who are saying the present Newtonian approach to science, the Newtonian approach to Western culture is coming to an end. It's leaving many unanswered, many questions unanswered. We're looking for a new way to look at science. So I see scientists are groping around for a new way to explain nature. And they're finding out that the Indians have the answer. The latest example of that is about 2-3 years ago, a UN report on the environment came out. Well, the advice that came out of that UN report was, if you want to know anything about the environment, ask the Indians.
So the new way is the old way.
The new way is the old way. They just have to discover it.
The North American Indian has been redefining himself according to his tradition.
Till a white man came, everything has changed. Kind of lost our pride because they dragged into us some, what they call it was they're making money, things that they make money, such things as the dope and the liquor and all that kind of stuff. That's when the Indians started to get kind of lost their pride at one time. At the early age, some of those kids and people. But I have a great hope that they're getting it back again.
He's now developed an increased interest in his tradition and theater. He was robbed of his history. The grace and magic of children taught memory.
When I was very young, we had no television then, so we had radio. And my Sunday afternoons were involved in listening to these radio programs of Hopalong Cassidy and the Lone Ranger. I was really fascinated by that. And I had a horse when I was young, and I asked my mother to buy me all this cowboy outfits. So I related to these cowboys immediately, because all I understood and all I heard of in these movies was this strange, these Indians, that they were always, and mind you, this is radio, so you had to imagine that, to me, an Indian did not make sense. It's just cowboys and Indians. But because a cowboy that I had seen in comic books, and was someone who rode horses, that's who I could relate to. And we went to a city school, an integrated school, as they call it. In those play yards, that's when I understood, and people made me understand that I was an Indian.
Regardless of what race or color you come from, or racial background you come from, you end up rooting for the good guys, of course, right? So we were subliminally seduced in that manner. Yeah. And of course that resulted in a lot of identity problems, which with this generation of Native artists, our generation, are working very hard to turn around. Because I think that when you go around committing crimes of theft, of any kind, you besmirch your soul. You destroy your spirit. And I think that British colonization has had that effect on British culture, and on the English-speaking culture is a culture without spirit, in my estimation. It's a very wealthy, materially very wealthy, technologically very sophisticated, but it ain't got no soul. With us, it's the reverse. We don't have the technology. We don't have the money in the bank. But man, we got soul. And I'm proud of that. It's a gift to be a Native person. It's a real gift.
Being an Indian to me is very important. When I look at the feelings of people, when I watch people speak, some of them talk from the books, some of them talk from what is written before them. But being an Indian, I can talk about what I see, the animals that I hear, the flowers. When I look up into the heavens and see the thunderbirds and see the eagles, and all the little animals that fly around. And when I look down on Mother Earth, I can see the medicines that she has given us. And I look into the bushes, I see the berries. And all those give me respect. And I could think what God has given me as an Indian person.
We can make people unafraid to be in the forest. Because white people, they don't like being in the forest too much. They find it pretty strange and pretty freaky.
Ron Hamilton is our witness and one of our guides in the woods.
If you look at all of time on this planet, and then you look at European contact here, it's just a sliver on the timeline, just a sliver. So then what about all this other stuff? Is it worth knowing? And I'd suggest that, like I said earlier, that we seem to be at a time when people who are immigrant here, people who are immigrants and living here, they really, in fact, do want to know. They do want to feel like they have some reason to be here. And I think that most Indian people really are very glad that all these European people are here. I certainly am. I don't feel bad that you're here. And so if you're going to be here, and if we're going to be glad that you're here, and you're going to be wanting to be here, your sense of being here can't be complete until you have some sense of my sense of being here, because I've been here a lot longer than you. There's my final note.
I think I don't want to instruct white people. I don't want to instruct my colonizer. When the situation is different, when the Cherokees are free, when Indian people are free, we can say amazing things to each other. But until we're free, until we're out of colonization, and of course I know freedom is a relative thing, and we might be pretty bad to each other if we were decolonized in the classical sense. But until we're not in a colonial situation, until we're not in a subservient person and the boss person relationship, I would rather we had nothing to say. I would rather that we not confess and not instruct.
When you think that indigenous populations lived all over the world pretty happily and in harmony with their environment for thousands and thousands of years before the invaders came, and you compare that with what's happened in the last 500 years, it's bad news. We didn't create that bad news. The Ainu of Japan didn't create that bad news. The Maori of New Zealand didn't create that bad news. The white people did. And it's time for them to look at what they've done and how to change, how to improve the damage that they have done to the world and to the people of the world.
There's a word called Messiah. It seems like it fits in with the Hopi. The Great Spirit is Masa, who gave us this knowledge, prophets, and warnings, and he breathed into it the sacred stone tablets he made for the Hopi, 2 sets of them, give it to them. And the white brother, who also is a Hopi, but his skin was much lighter, and two brothers received 2 sets of stone tablets. We still have 2 sets of in Horaibi, in Hotbala, and the other was given to a white brother who took some of our people and went east direction around the other side of the world. And he was given special mission to record things, to invent things, and to make life beautiful, clean, and lasting on that side. Then he was to come back here, look for his younger brother who's still holding on to this land through prayer, meditation, ceremony, and fasting, and keep this land in the Western Hemisphere beautiful.
And we certainly can't live with technological society for another 60 years, because we won't last that long. I don't think anyone can own the land, and I don't think anyone does. They have title to that land, that's all. But I think they've forgotten that the land owns us. We are the land.
Author Wilfred Peltier.
It takes a long time not to feel like an alien, a long time to feel at home, a long time to search out and discover who you are. But if you go all the way with that exploration, it takes you beyond race, beyond color, beyond class, beyond every kind of category. And you find that you belong to humanity, and that's who you are. When you no longer feel like an alien anywhere, you've come home. You know who you are. You found your family, the human family. And there is no such thing as the human family and others. Not anymore. As long as you leave anyone out, you are the alien. And that search for wholeness, for oneness, for who you are, has to continue. And the land is sacred. You don't live off it like a parasite. You live in it, and it in you, or you don't survive. And that is the only worship of God there is. When you buy land, you are dispossessed by the act of purchase. The whole transaction is a lie that says, this is my land. It belongs to me. When the truth is that you belong to it.
The sea has lost much of its richness, and great areas of the land itself lie in waste. Perhaps it's time for the raven to start looking for another clamshell.
Perhaps truly it is we who became the dispossessed in the war against the Indian.
We cannot let yesterday's tears blind our eyes to what we should do tomorrow. So with that, we have to determine what path we're going to follow, what road we're going to walk. It's a new day, it's a new age, and we have to know how we're going to paddle our canoe in the 21st century.
This is a sacred place where the Navajo come to pray.
Now, perhaps if we are to understand the story we've told tonight, the war against the Indians, it is our common history. We must listen to the prayer of another great Native person, Chief Dan George.
Vårt no chisiam. Tas nature can what quiet not just behave. That same muchin, say no muchin. Chow at you, no chisiam. O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds, and whose breath gives life to the world, hear me. I come to you as one of your many children. I am small and weak. I need your strength and your wisdom. May I walk in beauty. Make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things that you have made, and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so that I may know the things you have taught your children, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Make me strong so that not to be superior to my brothers, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me ever ready to come to you with straight eyes, so that when life fades as the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame.
We are the Iroquois, we're proud, we are strong. We've held on to our culture now. have changed, we remain the same. We listen to our elders, they know the way. Ceremonies, social dances, songs that we sing, being proud of our traditions, we all feel within. It's the feeling of the young, and it's the knowledge of the old. There are many lessons in the legends that are told. Deep in the heart, deep in the mind, beneath the great white pine. We are the Iroquois, we're proud, we are strong. We've held on to our culture now, oh, for so long. Though times have changed, we remain the same. We listen to our elders, they know the way. We are the Iroquois, we're proud, we are strong. We've held on to our culture now, oh, for so long. Though times have changed, we remain the same.